All right, hi. My name is Jen Brace, and I am the Chief Futurist at Ford Motor Company. And when I tell people what I do for a living, I get a range of reactions that are fairly common. First, I always have to repeat myself because there is no way they heard me right the first time. I could not have possibly said Chief Futurist. It sounds too weird. But it's true. That is my title. Then they ask if I can tell their fortune. The answer is no, so don't ask. Or if you ask, then I'm going to give you some made-up answer. And then they usually say something along the lines of, wow, that's the coolest job I've ever heard of. And I think those people are correct. They're right. It is definitely the coolest job. And then they say, what does it mean? What do you do? So as a futurist, what I do is I spend a lot of time looking at trends, looking at signals, paying attention to what I see around the world, and then questioning how the future might look different than today and how I can help our teams internally at Ford get better prepared for a future that has a lot of uncertainty within it. How do we make more resilient strategies by paying attention to how the external environment might change, how consumers might look different in the future, and how the products that they're used to seeing might differ from today? Because the truth is, the future always looks different than today, and if we don't start thinking about how that's going to look, we're in trouble. So if this all sounds a little overwhelming or you don't really know what to do with that, have no fear. I am going to give you some tips so that you can also think like a futurist, wow people at parties. The first tip that I have is that when you are thinking like a futurist, it's about preparation, not prediction. Now this one's a little disappointing, even to myself. From a lot of perspectives. I have futurist in my title, so people assume that I can tell them the future. But I'll tell you, I was the most disappointed when no crystal ball showed up in my mail when I took the job. It did not happen. And the truth is, nobody can tell you the future exactly. But what we can do is help you prepare by thinking about how it might look different than today. So let's talk about that. Right now, I actually want you to think back. I want you to think back to the 2011-2012 timeframe. And this was around the time you may have been hearing about a new app called Uber. There's some young people in the audience today. There was a world before Uber. Ask your parents how they felt about it when they first heard about it. But can you guys remember how you felt when you first heard about Uber? I'm guessing some of you were like, yes, sign me up. I'm into it. This sounds amazing. I just hit buttons and the car picks me up. Somebody in their own personal car is going to take me wherever I want to go. That's awesome. And then I'm guessing some other people think that it sounded crazy, dangerous, scary. You went, oh my God, who's ever going to use that? So I see some nods. Okay. Women in particular feel the second way. Yeah, that's where I was. I was in that camp. I will say this was before I was a futurist, but I was definitely in that second camp of, this sounds like a horrible idea. Oh my God, who would ever do that? And when you have that reaction to something new that you hear, when you're thinking like a futurist, that's a signal that that might be an outlier. So my second tip for you is that you need to watch out for outliers. You need to use that feeling when you go, oh, what a horrible idea, that will never take off because you heard something new. What you want to do instead is think about, well, how would the world look different if this were to take off? Or what would have to be true for this to become a thing? What would the environment look like? What would consumers expect? How might the future look different? Because when you have that immediate reaction of, oh gosh, no way, there's a good chance it's an outlier. Okay, my next tip is that when I'm thinking like a futurist, I'm often trying to be somewhat provocative, getting people to think about how the future looks different than today. But you always have to balance that provocation with plausibility. How do we do that? We do it by tracking trends. Now, when I say trends, I'm thinking something that has some staying power, at least 3 to 5 years, often even longer if we're thinking more of mega or macro trends. Not trendy. And when I look at trends, I'm looking at what I call the STEEP categories. That stands for social, technological, economic, environmental, and political. Now you'll notice I did not say automotive. That's often a surprise to people. But the truth is, I want to spend a lot of time paying attention to all the things happening outside of the automotive industry that might come back and impact our business in the future. So we do that by using this framework that pushes our thinking well beyond what's directly in front of us. The next thing I'm going to ask you to do often makes people a little uncomfortable, and that is to embrace uncertainty. So if we think of the trends as the things that we feel fairly confident about, right? We call it a trend when it's got some kind of staying power, 3 to 5 years. The uncertainties are the other side of that coin. They're the things that we don't know. Recognizing that we don't know everything about the future is just as important as looking at what are the things that we think that we know. We also use the STEEP categories for uncertainties. So we might look at an uncertainty as, will the price of gas go up or down? Will economic prosperity be high or low? Will global cooperation be high or low? These are big uncertainties that can have real impacts on the way that the environment is shaping up, and it can have big impacts on our business. So what we want to do is pay attention to those, recognize when we've made an assumption in our plan and we think that an uncertainty is going in a specific way. That's okay. We all need plans to move forward. But what you can do is now pay attention to any signals that might suggest that that uncertainty that you were really hoping was going in that direction that supported your plan. You got to start looking for signals that might suggest it's going in the other direction, because that's when you know you need to pivot. That's how you get better prepared for the future. All right, now this is my last tip. The last thing I'm going to ask you to do is imagine multiple versions of the future. So it's not just about a single future. Remember, we don't predict, we're trying to prepare. And the way that we do that is by considering multiple versions of the future. Now, the easy way that I like to approach this is by starting with those uncertainties I mentioned. There's usually really big uncertainties that have an impact or a potential impact on your business. You can start with those and you can start to basically cross them against one another and think about how they might interact with one another. What type of environment might that set up? We talked about trends and outliers. They can sprinkle in. You can think of the trends, the uncertainties, the outliers as a bunch of different ingredients, and the different scenarios you can make with them are the recipes that you can make with those ingredients. So you want to set up some broad futures. And once you've done that, what you can do is you can take your plans and you can stress test them against each of those futures so that you can figure out whether or not you've got blind spots, you've got holes in your plan, and you need to potentially create a plan B or start paying more attention to how you can be more robust in the future. Okay, so long story short, my tips for thinking like a futurist is that it is about preparation, not prediction. You need to watch out for outliers. Remember, those are the things that you initially go, ugh, no, that'll never work. You have to balance provocation with plausibility. Don't just make up stories. People don't like that. You need to embrace uncertainties, even if they're uncomfortable and it means it might be a problem for your plan. You want to know early. And lastly, you have to imagine multiple versions of the future. Okay, and with that, you are now all empowered to think like futurists. Thank you.